Hello, my name is Callum O'Neill, and I am the founder of an experiential training and coaching organization called TACT. Each one of us has a story to tell of how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted upon us, our families, our friends, colleagues, our clients. The daily news bulletins broadcast the ever increasing numbers of global deaths. What isn't being counted yet is the mental and emotional strains, stresses, and anxieties it is causing to so many of us. As we sit in our lockdown bunkers once again, I really wanted to offer something, do something constructive, something that might just help someone, any of you out there, particularly when thinking about returning to work after lockdown or continuing at work during lockdown with COVID in mind. Almost 350 years ago, Sir Isaac Newton penned a letter which contained a now rather famous quote: "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." So for this series of vodcasts, I have humbly and most gratefully climbed onto the shoulders of my Henley Business School alumni to ask them if they might share their experiences and expertise from the perspective of returning to work or continuing at work with COVID in mind. In this vodcast, I'm joined by Sheila McDerment, who's a business psychologist and coach. Sheila and I were cohort colleagues on Henley Business School's MSc in Coaching and Behaviour Change. Much of her work focuses on preventing burnout and developing resilience and well-being. Here, Sheila asks us to consider the positive impact that feeling connected has on our mental health and well-being. For many, this feeling of connection has been challenged by lockdown and by virtual working, and for some, the feeling of disconnection is strong. Here's me talking with Sheila McDerment.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our vodcast. Today, I'm very, very happy to say that we've got Sheila McDerment with us. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, Cal. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today for the vodcast. I thought maybe our audience today would benefit from hearing a little bit about you and your background. So give us your elevator speech or a bit about you and who you are and what your background is, please.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Cal. It's great to be here. So I'm a business psychologist and a coach. I live just outside Cambridge. I run my own business consultancy, which I've done now for 15 years. And my background is HR and psychology. And I'm now gone back to university once again to do the Henley Masters in coaching and behaviour change, like yourself. So which has been fascinating and interesting. And what I love about the work that I do is people are fantastically good at getting in their own way. So we have an amazing amount of potential and we don't always realise it. So all the work I do is really about enabling people to get out of their own way and do the best that they can. And whether that's at an individual level or a business level, it just means it's constantly fascinating and interesting because every situation and every challenge, every conversation that you have is different. So it's fun. I think like many people who work in the coaching area, it's very much about helping people. So that's fundamentally what it comes down to.
Fantastic. Yes, and I should say as a disclosure point that you and I do know one another because we are in the same cohort for the Masters at Henley, and it's really interesting how many different walks of life there are within our cohort as well, which started off as about 40 people, and now as we're in our final year. For various reasons and various other obligations, I think we're down to about 22 for our dissertation year.
Remainers, hey?
It's hard work, huh? One of the questions that I've asked each of my guests is what was the spark that got you into this? You talk about helping, but I guess everybody gets into the business for their own reasons. What was it for you that kind of gave that magic spark that said, actually, I want to move into the helping professions?
It's I was thinking it was quite a long time ago now, Cal, so let me cast my mind back. It really is. I mean, I think the fundamental thing is that we spend a lot of time at work. If you're working and if you're lucky enough to work, it's a fantastic thing to do, but we spend a lot of time at work. So if that's the case, then it just seemed to make sense to me that we are able to enjoy that as much as we can, and make that a positive and productive experience. So really everything that I do is around that. It's about helping people, individuals learn and businesses learn, so that it's positive for the business and it's positive for the individual. So because when you're working in a place where you're really enjoying it and loving it, it's just the best feeling. And for anyone who's been in that situation where actually it doesn't feel quite right, it's not good. So to be able to get the best out of people and help them be where they want to be and really do as much as that they can do, I think it's just a fantastic thing to be able to do.
Fantastic. Lovely. Thank you very much for sharing that. I always find it really insightful to hear people's personal stories of that vocational calling and what's important to them. Lovely. So in terms of why you came to speak with us today and share your observations and your experience with our audience, we are looking at the impact that COVID is having on all of us. And like all the guests, I asked if, what would you like to look at specifically on that, and what would you like to share? And for you, you said one of the top things for you was around about relationships. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, so there's an increasing body of evidence and research that really shows the importance of relationships and the importance of connection as really central aspect to well-being and resilience. And it's something that's been really challenged because of the situation we're in with COVID, and one that will play out very differently for people depending on whether their organisation is asking them to go back to work, or for many people they'll actually have to still, whether either through choice or because they're shielding, will have to continue working from home. So it's playing out very, very differently for different people. So I think connections and relationships are absolutely central to our well-being and our mental health. And it's something that COVID has absolutely directly challenged. So it's an interesting and relevant topic, and one that's really important, I think, just to be aware of quite how important it is and the impact it can have.
So how would that manifest then in terms of the workplace if we are being in a federated environment, everybody working from home, or we've got just kind of offline? You were talking about this kind of hybrid working approach. So considering the challenges that gives, how can people make a positive affect on relationships given the limitations that they've got, principally not being at work, if that's the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think it's about being, it's about making sure that we're aware as to quite how important it is. I think one of the things that's very different from now to 6 months ago is that 6 months ago we thought this was going to be a short-term crisis, it'd be over fairly soon, we'd be back to work, and the conversation we'd be having would be around going back to work. And while some people are, many people aren't, and so the situation is going to play out very, very differently. So we're faced with a situation where actually we're looking at a much more hybrid style of working, where some people will be working from home and might feel quite isolated as a result of that because they don't have the networks at work that they would naturally access. But some people will be going back to work, needing to go back to work, and actually feeling perhaps quite nervous and anxious about actually doing that. So from a management point of view, that throws up all sorts of challenges in terms of needing to manage people's different levels of anxiety, different experience, and a hybrid team whereby some people will be at work physically, but a lot of people will still be working remotely. So I think, and there's plenty of research that shows that actually working in virtual teams is a challenging thing to do. And we've known that for some time. The difference now is that that scenario is replicated many, many more times in many different organizations. So it's having a much, much wider impact. So it's about really focusing in and making sure that we're aware of what it feels like to still be and working in that virtual environment, and how it can challenge our feeling of connection, how it can challenge our feeling of well-being, and managing that as effectively as we can.
As you say there, the thing about it's around managing the feelings, and I guess on that level of emotions, it is going to affect different people differently as far as emotions are concerned. How much should we be aware of that as employers or HR business partners in terms of being able to manage that and have empathy with people's emotional effect?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really strange experience in that this is impacting everybody, but it's impacting everybody in a very, very different way. So some people will be responding quite positively, perhaps because they are well resourced, they are able to maintain good relationships and connections, and other people will find it much more of a struggle. So it's that the importance of recognizing this: you can't have one policy that applies to everyone, because everyone's experience and where they're dealing with it will be very, very different. But also that as individuals, in order to help ourselves to actually acknowledge how we feel about it, to actually think about our own emotions, and that it's okay not to be okay. So you won't go through this seamlessly. There will be times when, if this feels like you're feeling okay, but there will equally be times when this becomes a much more challenging environment to live and to work in. So recognizing that difference is quite an interesting, I think it's an interesting and valuable thing to do. It's interesting if you look at building on the experience of people who've worked in, for example, war zones or crises that go over an extended period of time. There is a well-known aspect to this where you can kind of hit a wall at 6 months. So actually, if you think we're 6 months from the initial lockdown, you get to the 6 months, and it's actually, that's the point at which we have to really kind of gather our resources and think, okay, now where do we go? Now what do we do? So we've certainly gone from a situation where we thought this was going to be a sprint into something where this is much more about, this feels like a marathon. So if you're feeling like that at this point, it's okay and it's totally normal. And it's about being kind to yourself, looking after yourself, make sure you're maintaining those relationships, and that will take you through.
From a psychological point of view, is there something there about the emotion you're experiencing it, rather than fighting it necessarily or denying it? There's something about accept that I'm going through a process.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, and people who are interested in looking at the theory around this, I mean, looking at something like the managing change curve can be really useful, in that it shows you that it is a natural process that we go through to have those different stages and emotions at different times. And actually knowing that and understanding it and accepting it can be really helpful, because then you can see where you are at this point as part of a process, rather than I don't feel okay now and I'm not sure why. So it's almost like having that sense there's a roadmap and there's a way through. And part of actually managing our way through that is about maintaining those connections, whether that's, I mean, we talked about relationships, but it's also connections with ourselves. In other words, what's important to us, what do we want, and what do we need? As well as it's staying in touch and connected with our emotions and acknowledging how we feel about the situation.
What does being kind to yourself mean? We say that, be kind to yourself, but what does that mean? If you're sitting there and you're stressed out about maybe you have asthma and you're afraid, you're not in complete isolation because it's manageable, but then you're thinking you got to go back to work. Maybe the boss you feel is, or your employer is putting you under some kind of pressure about it and you're feeling anxiety. Or maybe you're thinking, you know what, I need to just get on with this. I need to accept the way the world is and I need to get on with it, but I'm feeling kind of anxious about it. What is being kind to yourself mean? It sounds all very kind of abstract, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it
doing
could
jazz
do.
hands there.
Very nice, very nice. So 2 thoughts come to mind when you're saying that, Cal. One is about, it doesn't need to be perfect.
Okay.
So, so being kind to yourself could be enough just to get through today. So I think there's an aspect of that. We have I think there is a real need and a drive often to feels that things need to be as good as they can be. And while I understand that, we do put an extra level of pressure on ourselves if we're doing that. So maybe it is that there's just something there about watching out for that perfection, I think. And getting through the day. Can I get through today? Can I? Yeah. Have that shorter focus. If you get to the end of the evening, all good. So just not being so quiet, just being aware of the standards and aware of what it is we're imposing on ourselves. Catch your own language when you say, I need to do that? Do you? You might want to do it, but do you need to do it?
Yeah,
so
it's very good.
Something on the essentials, I think.
I like that very much. I like that. Thank you. So, in terms of looking at a word that's used quite a lot is resilience. In terms of being resilient. So I guess that's it's not necessarily the opposite side, but I guess somewhere on the continuum you've got being kind to yourself, but there's also something about building resilience to the situation around us. How does resilience work exactly? How, again, I suppose it's around that abstract of be kind to yourself. Well, what could that mean? What might being resilient mean? How can you kind of, do your 10,000 hours of resilience to get yourself up there? And why is it important?
I mean, really going back to what we said at the beginning of the conversation, it's important. Resilience is important because it enables us to deal with the challenges that life offers us, and that's effectively what it is and what it means. So life will always be challenging. It is now, even when this pandemic is over, and it will be. There will be other challenges. So resilience is just the attitude and the behaviours and how we're thinking about things and what we do that enable us to really deal positively with the challenges that life offers, and to learn from that and to continue to grow and to continue to develop. So it's not about, there is this idea sometimes that the resilience is about being tough and being armor plated, and it isn't. It's just about taking a positive approach to the things that come, and knowing and recognizing that you can learn from those, whatever they are. So that's what resilience is. Why it's so important is because it's the antidote to stress. So, and there are so many, so much of what we do in the anxiety and the world that we're living in that causes us to be stressed, and that can have physical impacts as well as mental impacts. So you can actually make yourself physically unwell, and resilience is very much the antidote to that. So if we can develop our resilience, then we can manage our stress levels, so we're less likely to suffer from that, and we're less likely to actually burn out. So that there's a kind of a fundamental need to focus on that resilience piece and make sure that we're able to do that as well as possible. In terms of what we do, it is about make sure you stay connected. So make sure you're looking after your relationships. Make sure you're connected with yourself in terms of what's important to you. What are your values? What do you need? What do you want? And stay connected with your emotions. So how do you feel about this? How are things? And as I was saying at the beginning, at some point earlier, it's okay not to be okay. And I think if you keep sight of those three aspects of resilience, then you can go a long way to actually keeping yourself in a sound, good place and being able to manage the way through.
It sounds almost like you're talking about, rather than letting things happen to you and be consumed by them, there's something about bringing a conscious awareness to what's going on. Be consciously aware of that emotion, that feeling, that if it's stress, if it's anxiety, notice it, be aware of it, bring it into the consciousness. It's almost kind of accept the vulnerability of that feeling that you've got and develop a relationship, a positive relationship with it. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I think that's a really good comment. And there's an element of control here, I think. That's the thought that comes to mind when you said that, Cal. So one of the things I can influence and I can control And then what are the things that I can't? So there's something, so the relationship is about identifying perhaps what are the things that I can influence, because then that's a good use for my energy and thinking about how I feel about this situation. What are the things I can't control? Because if I can't control them, really, how much of my time and my mental energy do I want to spend actually thinking about those and trying to address those when they're perhaps out of, out of the realm of anything that I can actually impact.
It's a great point. It's how much of our time is spent just worrying about the things we can't control. So if we ask ourselves that question, okay, what am I stressed about? Which of those can I control? Which of those can't I control? Then we can just probably get rid of the majority of it. Because the truth of the matter is we can do what we can do in this COVID crisis, but there is only so much that we as individuals can do. In terms of what the organization can do for the connections, you mentioned about the connections are really important, and the connections help to build resilience. And I guess there's strength in numbers, isn't there? When you don't feel isolated, when you feel, even if you're sharing your anxieties and fears as well as your hopes and dreams, there is strength in those numbers. So as an organization, as we're talking to the employers here, we're talking to the HR business partners here, what can they do to help with their employees' connections?
So for me, I think the theme that's come out over the last few months is not letting people get lost online. By that I mean that because of the way that we're working, because it's virtual, it's much harder to get sight of people who may be struggling and who are not doing well. And if you're in an office, you can see that and pick up on it and deal with it. And you can't. They're just. It's much easier to. I mean, hide online sounds like they're doing it deliberately, but it's just much easier to go beneath the radar. So there's something there about, from the employee's point of view, I think it comes back to then, if you don't feel well, if you don't feel okay, say it. But it does put a real emphasis on organisations to make sure they're having those conversations with employees regularly to make sure that they're okay. Have those virtual social coffees. Have that regular contact, because if it's just so much easier to lose sight of people. And I think that's the thing, to really, one of the aspects that companies really need to focus on. There's an interesting aspect as well around, I think it's probably easier to maintain relationships online when you already had a relationship in the real world, so to speak. And I think it's doubly hard for people coming into organizations now when actually they're coming in virtually. So they may not have been to the office, they may not have met their teammates. So managing that, how do you actually, or keep aside to the fact that you need to integrate somebody who's working virtually with an existing team. And it's just about whatever is best practice in terms of working well together, you need to do more of it.
Yeah,
it won't happen naturally. We have to consciously focus on that process.
It's a really great point. So if we were to as we approach this summing up really for this session, we're talking about there in terms of what the organization can do, how can HR make that contribution. If we were to summarize in terms of, for those who are watching and listening to you today, what are those top 3 things that they can do perhaps to help support themselves in these uncertain times?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to the 3 main themes I think that have come out during the course of our discussion. So make sure you are staying connected. So I think we've it's really easy to become disconnected. I've noticed it even with my daughter when she had to go back to school. It's almost like she'd been anti-socialized. And actually, so going back into school, and it'll be mirrored with a lot of people going back into the workplace, you have to rebuild those relationships. So it's okay for that to feel a little bit odd. Some of those relationships may not have survived this virtual world, but really focusing in on those relationships and make sure that you're maintaining them, whether those are at work or at home. One of the challenges, I think, is if you're your resilience is challenged, if you're not feeling in a good place, for a lot of people, they actually withdraw. And that's the time when you actually need to re-engage. So just in terms of the consciousness part of it, be aware of it. So, so that's the relationships. And then the emotions, as I said, it's okay not to be okay. Just acknowledge how you feel. Be kind to other people. They may be in a different place to yourself. And be kind to yourself. So look after yourself, connecting with yourself. What do you want? What do you need? Do something nice. Keep yourself in a good place, and that will help work, help us all work through it, really.
Absolutely. And I think, the story you spoke of your daughter and your observations about going back to work. I don't have any children myself, but what I noticed during a lockdown was that my dog had started to become very antisocial, because in our park, dogs had to stay on the lead because there was a risk, could COVID be transmitted through their fur? So they had to stay on the lead, and he became a right grumpy boots. And I then started to reflect on that and thinking, am I turning into a right grumpy boots? Because I'm not being involved in being sociable. I'm not talking to other dog owners in the park. We're not letting our dogs off the lead and going and playing and smiling about that and feeling that kind of, the oxytocin and the dopamine feeling. We're being very much isolated and keeping to ourselves. And it did make me reflect in terms of, am I needing to be re-socialized?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to the story with your daughter.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that weird thing where, but not weird, but it's happening to so many people. So there aren't many situations like this that have impacted all of us to some extent. I think that we've all had experiences through our life where we can relate to similarities in this kind of crisis situation, but they tended to be perhaps more short term or fairly isolated. But this is impacting everybody. So I think it's that's a great insight, Cal, as to your story of the dog in the park. And I think you're probably right. And it's just those kind of insights that we're seeing that everywhere. So that the impact is broad. So yeah, be kind to yourself, be kind to everyone else.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. Well, as we start to close, I would say thank you very much to you for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and your insights around this particularly strange time. I won't say that it's tough, because it's not tough for everybody. As we've divulged, different people are dealing with it in different ways, but it certainly is strange. And you mentioned this change curve. We're all on that at one phase or another of that. And I think it's something that I can put into the notes for today, that people can access that change curve, and maybe they'll be able to plot where they are on it as well. What I'd also like to ask is if they want to get in touch with you, Sheila, how can they reach out to you or your organization? What's your organization's name? Where can people find you?
That's a good question. Thank you for asking that, Cal. So the organization, which is me, is MC Works. And so I have a website, and my email address will be on the website, my contact details. So yeah, I'd be always delighted to have a chat. I was going to say in a coffee, but a virtual coffee is still good.
A virtual coffee. Virtual coffee. We can definitely, definitely set that up. Well, I'll put your website address on the end of this video so that people can get a hold of that. And if your email address is there as well, then we can do that, and people can get in touch with you and take it further there if needs be. Before I bring this to an end, I wanted to leave the opportunity for a last word with you. Maybe there's something that I haven't asked you that you would like to share with our audience today, or it may be something that you just want to sign off with. Either way, I'll give you the final word in our interview today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. It's lovely. It's always lovely to talk about things I find interesting, but also things that I really hope are of value and benefit other people. And it's okay, I would say. We'll get through this. It'll be fine.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sheila. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us today on this podcast.
Lovely. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.